Okay, some information for you before I perform test flights on this. The test flights will be in the next video. But I had to make some changes that I wasn't planning on making to get this project completed. Originally, I was going to put these BetaFPV motors on here because I wasn't shooting for a sub 250 gram conversion on this 1 meter chuck glider. I've got the BetaFPV motors on here now. But I went back and I looked, because the airframe is so light. So I went back and I looked at my thrust data, and I found that my RacerStar BR 1306 4000 kV motors on a 2S LiPo, spinning a GemFan or a diatone, either one, I think they're identical, 5x3 2-blade ABS prop. Each, that motor and that prop was putting out 242 grams. So I thought, well, if I can get it, because the RacerStar motors are 5 grams lighter than the BetaFPV motor, so that's a savings of 10 grams between the two motors. And I thought, well, if I can keep the weight down, the all-up weight down around 242 grams, then that's a 2-to-1 thrust-to-weight ratio. That is unlimited vertical. That is plenty. So that's the direction that I decided to take rather than put the BetaFPV motors on it. Unfortunately, after I got everything, wired up and was testing the motors and the props, one of the RacerStar motors got burn your finger hot, just running at 50% throttle for about 15 or 20 seconds. And at first, when I throttled them up and then I would cut the throttle, one of them would spin nice and slow to a stop, and the other one would stop pretty abruptly. So I thought what was going on was that one of my Opto ESCs had the brake set. Now both of these Opto ESCs are brand new. They're the exact same size, brand, everything. They're identical. So I thought, why would the brake be set on one and the brake not be set on the other by default? But you never know, right? You never know. So I looked up the information on that Opto ESC and found information on how to set it back to its defaults. So I did that, and then I ran the motors back up again, cut the throttle, same thing. It looked like it had a brake on. So that's when I put my finger on that motor and discovered just how hot it was getting, and the other motor that was spinning to a nice, smooth, slow stop was barely even warm. So I thought, oh, I got a bad bearing in it. And these were brand new motors. I hadn't used them in anything yet. So I took the motor, I took the C-clip off of the shaft, I pulled the bell housing off of it, I took some high-speed bearing oil, I lubricated the bearing really well, put it back on there, ran it back up again, same thing. So apparently that motor has a bad bearing in it, and I didn't have a bearing to replace it with. So I had to go to my backup plan. That was a shame, because those RacerStar 1306 motors have always been my workhorses on these 2S setups. Whether it's a single motor setup, this is the first twin motor setup that I've done myself. But that would have saved 10 grams of weight on this. The other thing that happened, so then I had to put the BetaFPV motors on it and add 10 grams to the all-up weight. The other thing that happened was I was going to use 5-gram servos all the way around, and I thought, I like having the 5-gram servos on the ailerons because it's going to require quite a bit of torque to spin that 1 meter wing through the air fairly quickly. But I thought, for the elevator, the control surfaces aren't real large. The rudder's got a fairly large control surface on it now because I extended it, but that's a big lever back there. It's not going to take a lot of torque from a servo to be able to actuate either one of those control surfaces. So I decided I was going to put a 4-gram servo on the elevator, and I only had one of those, and I was going to put a 3.6 gram servo on the rudder. So I have a 3.6 gram servo on the rudder. Well, my 4 gram servo was intermittent, and it was brand new. It was a Turnigy 4 gram servo that I'd never used before. I bought 3 of those way back when, and it was intermittent. You know, I would power it up and it would start working, and then it would completely stop, and I would unplug it, plug it back in. So I don't know if there's a wire frayed or broken, you know, inside the insulation on the cable, or if it's a bad soldering joint inside the servo itself, but I didn't have time to mess with it, so I ended up having to put one of those 5 gram servos on the elevator, which is really overkill for it. So I'm almost thinking, you know, I thought back to my GFS F22 Micro, which has pretty large control surfaces on it. It weighs 150 grams. It's a lighter weight than this, but it has unlimited vertical, and I fly it really hard, you know, and I do a lot of aerobatics with it, and it just has 2.5 gram servos on it. So I really think that 4 gram servos all the way around, digital servos, because digital servos are going to have more torque than the analog servos. I think 4 gram servos all the way around on the ailerons, the elevator, the rudder. I think that would work absolutely fine. If I had 4 gram servos that were functioning that I could have used in this project, I would have done that, and that would have saved me at a minimum of 4 grams of weight. So that's 14 grams of weight right there. I didn't know how much time I was going to have to dedicate to this project. It's not a lot. I've had to do it piecemeal, you know, whenever I could set aside time to work on it. One of the things if I would have had time to do, that would have saved, I'm sure would have saved me at least 5 grams of weight, was trimming all the wires down to just the length that I needed to get them from the servo to the gyro, you know, from the ESCs to the gyro, from the ESCs to the motors. If I would have trimmed all those down, I'm sure I could have saved at least 5 grams of weight. So that would have been 19 grams of weight total that I would have been able to save if I could have used all the optimal components to try and get it below 250 gram. And then I know I would have been able to hit my mark at about 242 grams of all up weight with the battery that I want to use, and that with the 1306 motors, that would have been a 2-to-1 thrust to weight ratio, would have been fantastic. Unfortunately, I had to make some changes, so my all up weight right now is completely finished, except for putting landing skids on it now, because where I have to land, I'm going to have to put landing skids on it to protect the airframe and protect the control horns and the servos and stuff. If you have nice soft grass to land on, it's ready to go at 260 grams. Like I said, if you use the components I spoke about with all that weight savings, you're going to be down around 242 grams all up weight with a 2-to-1 thrust to weight ratio. Sub 250 grams, you can get there easily enough. With just changing the motors and the servos, you're going to be below 250 grams. So, all right. So anyway, those are changes that I had to make to it. Information on the RacerStar motors, the ones that I would prefer to use on this to get it sub 250 gram. The 1306 4000 kV motors with the 50/30 two-blade props at 100% throttle puts out 242 grams of thrust. Keep your weight down at 242 grams, which is easy enough to do with what I was speaking about. That's a 2-to-1 thrust to weight ratio. At full throttle, it's 7.6 amps times 2, that's 15.2 amps. 242 grams times 2 is 484 grams of thrust from the 2 motors. At 50%, 203 grams of thrust at 3 amps times 2, it's 406 grams of thrust at 6 amps total. So even with the 1306 motors, you'd be cruising around at about 30-35% throttle, I think, no problem. Okay, so that gives this, with the 1306 motors, even at its current weight, that would give it 1.8 to 1 thrust to weight ratio, which is just right on the edge of unlimited vertical, but with the weight savings that I spoke about, that would give it a 2-to-1 thrust to weight ratio, and that's definitely unlimited vertical. The BetaFPV motors, I mean, these are serious overkill for this, but these are the only motors other than the 1306s that I have that would work on this, you know. I don't have a lot of, you know, either I have motors that are too small for this or too big for it. So even though those motors are, you know, overkill for this, that was the closest thing I had to use on this, you know, compared to the 1306 motors. So and they're the only ones that I had two of that were the same size and the same kV. But the BetaFPV motors, and they're spinning the HQ 5032 blade props at 100% throttle. Each one of these motors puts out 342 grams of thrust at 10.7 amps. So times 2, that's 684 grams of thrust at 21.4 amps full throttle. At 50% throttle, it puts out 203 grams of thrust at 5.7 amps by 2 is 406 grams of thrust at 11.4 amps. So at its current weight, the thrust to weight ratio is a 2.6 to 1 thrust to weight ratio, and with the weight savings that I spoke about, it would be a 2.8 to 1 thrust to weight ratio. So with this setup, it's gonna have vertical acceleration. You know, not only unlimited vertical, but it's gonna have vertical acceleration. There's no reason that with this setup I'm going to have to go above 75% throttle to do big, huge, wide loops, to do, you know, climb vertically for a long way, do split S maneuvers, whatever, other than just to see what it will do at full throttle. So we may have to do that at least once. But I want to keep I don't want to hammer the throttle a lot with this setup because it does pull a lot of amps, you know, for that little 2S LiPo. And I want to get some decent flight time out of it. So my guess is with this power system at this weight, I don't think I'm going to have to go above 30% throttle to just cruise around with it. You know, I'm definitely not going to have to be 50% throttle to cruise around with it. But anyway, it is what it is. The battery that I'm going to be flying in it is a GMB. It's a 2S, 550 milliamp hour, 80C LiPo. It's probably the largest 2S I'm going to try to put in it. I did log the CG on the chuck glider when it was just a chuck glider. And I am significantly further forward on my CG than I was when it was just a chuck glider, but I would rather it be nose heavy on the first test flight rather than tail heavy. So I don't think it's definitely not going to be tail heavy. I'm hoping it's not going to be too nose heavy, but if I have to put any ballast weight on it, I would certainly rather put it way back there on the tail where it's not going to require much to get the CG rather than having to put it on the nose. Now, one reason it's nose heavy is because I've got an additional 10 grams of weight with these two motors on the front of that wing. So that would have cut the weight forward of the CG by 10 grams with the 1306 motors. But we'll just have to see how it goes. I don't know. I have no idea. You never know how these projects are going to turn out. It looks like it would fly, but who knows? And the motors, I've got just a slight bit of down angle on the mounts, so we'll see if I need to adjust my down angle or not. But I've got the bi-main gyro in it. Everything is working, everything is correcting in the proper direction. All the control surfaces are moving in the proper direction. It turned out, I think it turned out pretty clean as far as conversion. It could have been a little bit better if I had trimmed all those wires down to just the minimum length that I needed, but I just didn't have time to do that. If I was going to have to hold off on this to do all that, it probably would have been another 2 weeks before I would have had time to finish it up. So I kind of rushed through it. I don't normally do that, but in this case I had to rush through it a little bit. But anyway, today I will have the landing skids set up on it, and have it ready to go for its first test flight. But anyway, that's the information that I wanted to give you guys, letting you know what changes I had to make to it. Now, I didn't glue in the horizontal stabilizer into the fuselage. What I did was I just tacked it, spot welded it with hot glue, a couple of spots on the top, a couple of spots on the bottom. I'm kind of debating whether or not to do that with the main wing. It fits pretty darn snug in there. I don't think that it's going to move around on me. Anyway, I'm pretty happy with the way it turned out. It's unfortunate that I wasn't able to use all the electronics that I really would have liked to use. But I'll be ordering, I've got links to all the components in the show notes. I will definitely be ordering a 6-pack of those Emax 4-gram servos. And I'll be ordering another one of those RacerStar 1306 4000 kV motors. And I'll have everything on hand and ready to go before I convert the other 1 meter chuck glider. I bought 2 of these, and so the second one I want to convert into high performance sport glider. So it's going to have a single tractor motor on the nose with a folding prop. At least that's the plan right now. So we'll see how successful, or how if this one is a success or a failure, and at least if one way or the other, I'll know what direction I need to go with the next conversion. So anyway, thanks for watching, and the next time you see this, I'll be launching it in the air. I'm just waiting on weather. So thanks for watching, and I will see you in the air.